there, I'm Juliet Rynear. I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Native Plant Society.
Hi, Laura Bennett Kimball. I am a volunteer. Been doing rescues for a few years now.
Hi, I'm Patricia Burgos, member of the Lake Beauty Berry chapter, and I have worked as the land manager.
So I'm just going to talk about the basics, a broad overview, why we rescue, planning for rescues, and then Laura Bennett Kimball, she's going to talk about volunteer management and what happens on the ground, species rescuing priorities, digging plants, and other things. Matt Camacho Vieira is one of our nursery partners at Green Isle Gardens Nursery. So she's going to talk about partnering with nurseries for this kind of work. Teresa Lutz, who unfortunately cannot be here, I will be presenting her slides for her and reviewing how she started out with plant rescue and how she's grown over the years from a newbie to now she's like an experienced plant propagator and restoration person. And then Patricia Burgos is going to talk about working with land managers and basic restoration steps and principles. So I'd briefly like to talk about our policy. So our policy number one, that number one word in our policy, preservation. Preserve, conserve, and restore the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. And preservation is our highest priority. And that means that we work to preserve natural intact lands from development, to save those plants and plant communities and all the life forms that depend on them. That is number one. And barring that, when properties can't be saved, and unfortunately, the amazing properties that we're working on now to rescue from, it's heartbreaking. It feels like a crime against nature. But when all efforts have been exhausted to try to save the property, and believe me, for decades, volunteers worked to save the property. There was even money to acquire it at one point in time, but then, the county made a decision to spend it elsewhere. So that, it's just, that's the sad fact. That's what we're dealing with. So why do we rescue when all efforts to preserve the land have failed, and when development is imminent and assured? So that means we know that there are already plans that have gone before either a city or a county to develop a particular property. So then we have to get in touch with the landowner. We have to request permission to rescue. And then usually we have to sign contracts with them. Many of them want to specifically lay down the rules of when we can be there, how long we can be there, the extent of what we can do, who do we have to notify, et cetera. Then we have to provide them with insurance documentation. And also we have to get permits from the state of Florida to cover any listed species. And listed species are endangered species, but they're also commercially exploited species. So anything on the list from the state of Florida, which you can find on their website, those you need a permit for in addition to having the landowner sign a permission form. So we're often asked how can we help? And number one, become a citizen advocate for our natural lands. All these decisions are made at the local level. So your city and your county, these commissioners are the ones making the decisions, and you're also your planning agencies. A lot of there are plans in most cities and communities of how to develop and what we're going to protect. But a lot of developers ask for variances. They get variances all the time. So we need people on the ground locally advocating for our natural lands. If you believe that natural lands are important, if you like to be out in nature, if you like to hike, if you love native plants, if you love all the native wildlife that depends on native plants, then make your voice heard. Insist with your local city and county officials that we preserve lands like this for the citizens to enjoy. It's so hugely important. And to help you advocate, we developed in 2019 a policy advocacy handbook, and you can access that on our website. You can download it. I put our website address on this slide, or you can just, go to Google FN Florida Native Plant Society and get to our website, and then just click on the policy section and you'll see the link to this handbook. All kinds of tips and tricks about how to interact with and how to interact with your elected representatives and how to advocate for our native plants and our natural communities. So having said that, now let's get into the nitty gritty about rescuing. So how do we do this? How do we prepare? We have to contact the landowner. I mentioned that briefly, and get permission to enter the property and to collect. We have to have all of our ducks in a row. We need to find a nearby recipient site, and we have to contact land managers and work with them. We have to survey both the rescue site and the recipient sites, the potential recipient sites. We need to do surveys of both sites to know what species are present on both sites. So just because a community is sandhill and the recipient sites are sandhill doesn't mean that all of the plants that are being rescued can go to the recipient site, because one of the things we want to avoid is hybridization. So that's one of the concerns, and I'll go over that a little bit more. We need to obtain all of our collection permits, and we need to have all of this information, the insurance documentation, the collection permits, etc., on us whenever we're present on site. And then also we have to contact our nursery partners. If in the event that one of the recipient sites doesn't have a nursery of some kind that we can use to harden up the plants that we rescue, then one of our big nursery partners in Central Florida is Green Isle Gardens. And so they have been fantastic over the years. They have taken care of so many plants that we have rescued and worked with us in so many ways. It's awesome. So studying donor sites and recipient sites, we have to identify the plant communities that are present, right, that we are rescuing from. Sometimes there's more than one plant community, because you can have uplands and wetlands adjacent to each other on a site. And so you're dealing with two different plant communities. And so you'll need to have the plant communities present at your recipient sites. You need to perform a floristic inventory, an inventory of all the plant species existing on both sites. Now, for the case of public sites, the recipient sites that are publicly protected, they usually have plant lists, and often it's just a matter of just making sure, comparing the lists and making sure that you're not going to be bringing something on site that will hybridize or endanger one of the existing plant populations on the recipient site. And it's also very important to check your elevations and topography. So, you should match up the donor and recipient sites as much as possible. So then we need to talk about population genetics. So the whole idea here is to conserve entire plant populations. So ideally, you want to rescue at least 100 plants of each species. I mean, because you want to avoid founder's effect in the population. Now, if the plant species already exists on the recipient site, that's good, because that way you'll be just adding to the genetics on the site. So that's another reason that we insist on having the recipient site as close to the rescue site as possible, because that limits problems like outbreeding depression. So outbreeding depression is kind of like inbreeding depression, in that certain genes fall out of the gene pool over time, and like deleterious effects can build up in the gene pool. So we want to avoid any kind of harmful effects. So you would never, for example, rescue a population from Central Florida, Polk County, and introduce it up into the Panhandle. That would just be completely irresponsible. So we try to get the recipient sites at least 10 miles within the area where we're rescuing. Sometimes we go as far as 20, but that's just a good general rule. You want local germplasm. So also we need to consider plant biology. So, plants are complicated. So you really need to understand the species that you're rescuing. Are they annual or perennial? That makes a difference. Are they long-lived or short-lived? Do you understand the plant communities? Are these species widely adapted, or do they have very specific habitat requirements? Also, mating systems. Some plants rely on just outcrossing. Some plants can self. In other words, they can self-pollinate. And then there's these really weird plants like Ziziphus salata, which I believe the new name is Pseudoziziphus salata. This is one of the most complicated mating schemes around. So they're self-incompatible, obligate outcrosser. They're cross-incompatible with certain genotypes. So they can only mate successfully with certain genotypes. So in order to successfully introduce a population of this species, you literally have to have the genetic work done on all of the plants. And thankfully, Archibald Biological Station has done a ton of research for decades on this species, and they've worked with Bachtower Gardens. And so there have been some very successful introductions of this species, but that's just like an extreme example of some of the things you need to consider when you are rescuing. So other considerations are seed and reproductive biology. So on a lot of these sites, we don't just rescue plants, we collect seeds, and we collect the seeds so that we get more bang for the buck, so that we can also propagate additional plants of these species. So build bigger populations on the introduction sites. And so there's a lot of things you have to know about the seeds. Most seeds have some kind of dormancy issue. Even in Florida, where we have very little frost, there are still seeds that need to be like cold processed or frozen before they can germinate well. And then there are seeds with tough seed coats. Maybe they need to be scarified before they're sown. And then there are some seeds, they're called unorthodox, that you can't dry or freeze. The pawpaws are a good example of that. You have to plant the seeds fresh. And then I have to always include this picture on the bottom right of Polyglot. So that is one of the rescue plants that we dug up. And so you can see that this is a plant that has cleistogamous flowering and pollination. Cleistogamous meaning underground. So you see that white root and you see this white flower right here. That's a closed flower. They never open. They self-pollinate in that closed flower. And so you often see around Polyglot plants what looks like little seedlings popping up all over the place. And half the time you don't know if it's a clone that popped up from the root or if it's a seed that germinated from this underground pollination. They're just fascinating species in Florida. It's really amazing. So then after we introduce, we monitor our population introductions, and we do this to see, well, are we being successful or not? Are there lessons that can be learned? Have we hardened off correctly? Are there other issues? Some plants, have very sensitive roots. They don't like a lot of root disturbance. So there are plant species that may survive the rescue and the hardening off, but then they don't seem to make it in the long run long enough to reproduce once they're introduced onto a recipient site. So we're constantly trying to tweak how we rescue and how we harden off plants and how we reintroduce into the wild. And we especially monitor our rare plant populations. So we number tag species of concern that are critically endangered, like Warium plexifolia, Lupinus iridorum. That's just two examples of species that we perform annual demographic monitoring on. And so with that, I will turn it over to Laura Bennett-Kimball.
Okay, am I on?
You're on.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura. I've been volunteering for a few years now with these rescues. And So I'm going to share a little bit of information today about what it's like just, basically to be in the trenches. So as Juliet said, this effort, it's the last resort for these plants. And so it's a real, it's physically hard, but it's emotionally hard as well, because you're in these places, you're going, wow, look at this, look at that. And then you think, well, I'm standing here with a stack of empty pots and my shovel. And the reason I'm here is to remove the elements that make this place beautiful so that it can be developed, which is crushing. However, we could be in a situation where these developers, these landowners, didn't even let us be on site. So we need to be appreciative for what, we do have that. So that said, let me get into the details. I want to talk about just the volunteering efforts involved, prioritizing the different plants that we're looking at, and then talking a little bit about just boots on the ground. So to start with, if you're interested in doing this, I would welcome anyone who has the fortitude for it, and it's good to work with experienced rescuers who can help you with sorting things out, because you need to know what plants should I prioritize, which species are the ones to pay attention to. How do I do it? Do I just dig a plant and pop it in a pot? And also identification. This is frankly an excellent way to learn about Florida's amazing native plants. So there's a real value in that. And it's really important for beginning volunteers to work with the experienced ones, because you can really benefit with all of that. And the hands-on efforts are wonderful. So if we move on to the next slide, I've got an example of an amazing plant. It's called white-mouthed dayflower. That's the common name. Just an incredible, massive, happy plant that is in one of these sites where you'll see, this environment with the trees, and it's just overwhelming. And so these are the sorts of things that you see. And then moving on to the next, we've got a nice view again of just what's out there, just to see these beautiful plants. And you can learn about these habitats, and they're special to Florida, and it's good to know about them. And also the plant communities. There's it's really interesting. The more you do these projects, the more you see that certain plants like to hang out together. And you'll see the Comelina with green eyes. They like to be together, and certain lichens and mosses will be with certain plants. And so it's very educational while you're out there with your shovel and you're sweating and dealing with the environment. So I'd like to move on to talking about how do you prioritize the plants. You show up, you've got your shovel, you've got your jug of water, you've got your stack of pots. What do you save? There's just, it's overwhelming when you see it. So you need to think about these different details with, is it an endangered plant or is it a common one? That's where working with an experienced volunteer is going to help you, because there are common plants that, they're fine growing along the roadsides. They're everywhere, but there are certain endangered ones that we like to target. And then again, as Juliet mentioned, perennial versus annual. Annual, you can collect the seeds, but why get the plant if it's going to go kaput in a couple of months after you put the effort into potting it up? And so that's where the plant versus seed comes in. And interestingly, the next point, survivability success, is another factor in whether you go with a plant or a seed, because lupines, they're gorgeous. You find them, they'll be this small and you'll think, oh, I can rescue that. No, not really. It's going to go boom as soon as you dig it out of the dirt. It never really rarely, I should say, it rarely bounces back. So with lupine, you want to get the seeds. So you wait, you collect the seeds. And because the survivability obviously is better with those little seeds. And then individual plant size is another factor. Like the Comelina in the earlier slide, if that is one plant, that's going to be one heck of an effort to try to get that. But if you find one that just has, 2 to 5 stems, there's a good one to get. You can dig around it and get it out. So you have to look at plant size and root systems. Some plants have these delicate little systems that are very easy to dig up, like Liatris, of course, that has this big corm that you dig around it, and it's just like, some can be as big as your fist, but the roots only go, yay far down. So you're good. You can pop that in a pot, no problem. Green eyes, very, very big, very long. Scrub buckwheat. And in this photo, I've got a picture of a Polyglot robusta, and that root goes from my waist, and I'm tall, it goes from my waist all the way down to my boot. And I just kept digging and digging and digging and digging. I was like, seriously, okay. So sometimes the little ones, they're like icebergs. You think it's just a small little thing, but no. So you have to prioritize. So here's an example in the next slide of some really awesome plants. You've got a small turkey oak in the foreground, saw palmettos, and some shrubs back by our wonderful volunteer, and they're too big. You have to walk by them, and that's rough, but that's one of the judgment calls we have to make, because there's just, you can't do it. You don't have a pot big enough for those root systems. And in the next slide, again, talking about these seeds, this is a lupine here in the left photo. And we've got a picture of Juliet with some other volunteers working on collecting seeds. And you can see the little bags that will be used to put over blossoms to catch the seeds. So there's so many techniques involved. It's amazing. So that's pretty crucial. And so now I want to transition from that to just the boots on the ground, just kind of the nitty gritty, what we're doing. So this is a picture of my boots on the ground on a rescue site with many tracks. There are millipede tracks. There's what I think is a sand skink track. And there were also near here, not in this picture, I don't think, bobcat tracks. So these are habitats, and you are always reminded that when you're doing this. And then on the left, we have Britain's beargrass, which we have been doing a massive effort to remove those at this recent site. There's many, many there. And so there's been a lot of work with those. They need the giant pots. So that's a lot of work. So it is, really, it's a privilege to be doing this work, and you want to do it right. You want to do everything you can so these plants survive. So, so you're out there, you're not just digging the plants, you're collecting moss and lichen and gathering these great, lovely millipedes. And that's what's in that bag. The millipedes are not visible, but you're seeing deer moss and various lichen and who knows what else is in there. But they go in a garbage bag, which is, kind of an indignant thing for them. But then they go to their new sites and they are set free in new environments. But the digging of the plants themselves, it's not just plop them in a pot. You need to prepare the pot. You need to have adequate water, especially when you're dealing with this sandy soil. There's just no way around it. These plants normally don't need a lot of moisture, in these sandhill scrub habitats and so forth. But when you traumatize them and dig them up, they need some water. So then you need to get them in there carefully. The other factor you don't always know how long they're going to be in those pots. So you really want to set them in so their chance of survival is good. You want to do everything you can. It's not just, okay, I rescued it, it's in the pot, forget about it. So, so that said, you also need to take care of yourself when you're out there too. So it's like, you got to hydrate the plant, you got to hydrate yourself. You've got to take care of yourself to take care of those. And so one of the things that can help with that is the equipment that some of the nursery partners help us out with. Like, here we've got, the gator out there, and it'll collect pots for us, so we don't have to carry them manually, and with wagons and trailers to load the plants. It's a huge operation. And I could go on, but I'm going to wrap it up there and say thanks for your time, and I'll be on at the end if you have any questions.
Thank you, Laura. That was lovely. Oh, I have some duplicated. Okay, so Mac, I'm gonna hold Mac to the end to see if we can get her back on. We'll skip her slides and move into Juliet covering Teresa's part.
Okay, so I'm going to try to channel Teresa as best I can. So let's make sure we're on the same page here. Are you looking at the slide of the shade house at Lake Louisa State Park?
For sure I am.
Okay, perfect. So I so wish Teresa could be here. She started volunteering, over a decade ago, and she has come full circle. I mean, as someone who started out monitoring rare plants at the state parks, to then rescuing, and then from rescuing started to get really, really depressing for her. So she transitioned into more seed collection and then propagation. And so she's found her happy place. And I think that's a great example for other people, because as a volunteer, you should always find your happy place. You should do what really feeds you. And when you approach it in that way, then whatever you do is just going to be that much more effective. So she's a great example. And there's a picture of her on the next slide. This is at Mackay Gardens and Lakeside Preserve. We did a rescue there years ago, and she also helped do a number of restoration projects at that park. And then there's another picture of her. Well, actually, she's not in this picture. This is a picture she took. This is a rescue site. See Julie Becker on the left, Jackie Raleigh on the right. They are longtime rescuers. And this is a site, 2014, a scrub site in Orange County near Orlando. That was one of her very first rescue operations that she attended. And then there's the next slide shows Teresa crawling around on the ground. I think it's a combination of seed collection and plant rescue. Just gives you an example of how devoted she is. And then she also included this great slide. This was one of our last days rescuing from this scrub site in Orlando. And we had just a wonderful crew, students and longtime FNPS volunteers. The camaraderie on these rescue sites is just awesome. And I'm always so grateful to get to know people and to experience this with them and to cry on each other's shoulders. And then the next slide, so she's showing a picture of Florida Rosemary. And so this plant, we couldn't find any that were small enough to rescue, but it's a very important plant in this scrub. And so we tried taking cuttings and rooting the cuttings and growing the plants from that, and that didn't work. But we happened upon a giant plant that had a stem that had fallen over and had rooted in the ground. So we said, you know what, this looks promising. So we cut it off the parent plant and we potted that rooted cutting up because it had rooted naturally in nature. And then we started hunting for more examples of that. So we found a number of plants that had done that, naturally rooted. And so all of those plants that we collected survived and are flourishing at the recipient site at Bill Frederick Park in Orlando. So that's a place where we have 2 restoration sites at Bill Frederick Park, and it's an extremely important park because it has one of the last remaining intact scrub habitats on the south part of the Mount Dora Ridge. I mean, from tens of thousands of acres, we're down to less than 200 now. So it's a critically important site. And if you live near Orlando or you are going to visit, that's a great park to visit and support. And the staff there has been just absolutely wonderful. So the next slide is a picture of 2 volunteers that are monitoring in this picture. So I mentioned earlier, we whenever we do population introductions, we demographically monitor all the rare plant species. So in this picture, it looks like they've just picked up a number tag from a Polyglotonia that perished, because I recognize this particular site. And the next slide, you can actually see a Polyglotonia plant there. It's getting its number tag there. And so we monitor this plant when it's reproductive. And that is true for most of the plants that we monitor. We monitor in the reproductive stage, because one of the things we like to do is calculate seed production or potential seed production. So, and plus it's also easier to see little plants like this when they're in flower. And the next slide, this is a picture of one of the recipient sites at Bill Frederick Park. This was taken years ago. And then the next slide, she's got a picture of blue curls. This is one of her absolute favorite plants. It's horrible to have favorites. It's like, having favorite children, but we do fall in love with certain plants. And this is one that she absolutely adores. And then the next slide is a picture of Lupinus aridorum seed pods. And so this Lupinus species generally do not rescue well. We have done it, and we have successfully rescued some plants that, a handful of them went on to reproduce and make seeds for the future generations. But we have found over time that the absolute best bang for the buck is to collect the seeds and disperse them on site. And so we have been doing that for years at our rescue sites and just building that seed bank that way. And so because these pods dehiss when the seeds are ripe and the pods are dry, dehiss meaning they like explode, the seed pod just cracks and the seeds are ejected. If you've ever been out in a scrub habitat surrounded by lupins at the right time of year in the summer, you'll hear the explosions, and sometimes you'll get hit in the face with flying seeds, which is pretty cool. And in the next slide, she's got a photo of one of the seed pods that's opened up, and those are the ripe seeds inside, still attached. And so the next slide is actually a photo of me placing a pollination, an organza bag over the seed pods. So you can get these organza bags. They're like gift bags. They're, at all kinds of craft supply stores. You can get them online too. So if you have like lupins in your yard, people are always saying, how do I get more lupins in my yard? Or how do I, share with my friends? So if you want to share seeds with your friends, this is a great way to collect the seeds. I would just say that in a rescue situation, you're going to collect everything you can. In a sharing situation, you don't want to collect too many seeds because you'll impact the long-term, viability of your population. So if you want to share some seeds with friends, that's great. Don't take more than 10% of the seeds that are available in any given year. So that's a good rule of thumb. It's a rule of thumb that the Center for Plant Conservation has used for many decades and successfully. So yeah, by all means, share with friends, but don't endanger your own population. On the next slide, we have a picture. This is one of our rescue sites. It's currently a rescue site. It started out as a seed collection site. when we contacted the landowner, who is a developer, and we said, hey, when are you planning to develop this site? And they said, not for 5 years. So we said, well, in the next 5 years, can we collect seeds and cuttings from your property so that we can grow plants out for restoration projects nearby? And they've been very amenable to that. Unfortunately, we're now switching into rescue mode on that site. And the next picture is, this is a picture taken at Green Isle Gardens, and you can see all those seed trays are filled with seeds from plants that we've collected from at one of those recipient sites that you just saw. And the next slide, that is probably a picture of either needlegrass piptacedium. That's probably what that is. Yeah, thanks, Val. That's also one of her favorite plants. And then in the next slide, Perinechia species, that's yet another one of her favorite plants. I think there's like 2 or 3 species of Perinechia on that current rescue site. And then on the next slide, that looks like Polygonella, October flower, Polygonella. Yeah, I don't want the tall one. Yeah. How's that for scientific accuracy? And then in the next slide, she has a picture of a scene that just absolutely broke her heart. She could not, and it's a is this a video, Val? This one's not the video. Okay. Well, so we showed up at the site that, wasn't supposed to be developed for 5 years, but apparently we weren't totally clear on the fence that was on the property wasn't actually the border. So we showed up and like part of the property had been bulldozed. And it was just like, it was so horrifying. It went beyond the fence, and we had no idea, that we thought the fence was the property boundary, but in actuality, they were preparing it for the next stage of their development, which they're working on now. And the next slide. Oh, this is a Green Isles, a seed head. Another really cool plant. We've collected lots of green ice seeds over the years. And the next slide is a picture of Teresa in front of 2 large bags of seeds that we took to St. John's River Water Management District, Little Italy site, which is one of our recipient sites. And so there are certain seeds that are best to just scatter the seeds on site because they germinate so well, and it just makes more sense to do that, to broadcast the seeds rather than to grow them out and then plant them. So these are 2 big bags of seeds that we took to St. John's after we collected one autumn, and those were used at the restoration there. And then the next slide is a picture of Banyan Grandiflora, one of our endangered scrub plants. It also occurs on sandhill properties that also have a little scrubby element to them. So this has been present at a number of our rescue sites. And this is pretty easily grown from seed as well. And the next slide, that's a very blurry picture of nursery plants at Green Isle Gardens, grown from seeds that we collected. The next slide is another picture of one of her favorite plants, and I can't think which plant this is right now. Oh, that could be Pennsylvania. Yeah, okay. And then the next slide, that's a picture of Rosie Mulholland planting some of the rescues at one of the recipient sites. Rosie was one of the land managers at St. John's River, Little Italy site. And before that, she was the land manager at Lake Louisa State Park. And now she's just retired, and she's like continuing to do like all the same work she did before as a volunteer. So that's pretty cool. We're really grateful to Rosie and her expertise.
Yeah, and if you're interested, we did do a lunch and learn with Rosie on her restoration of Little Italy. So
yes,
if you want to learn more about that, that's available in the, if you read the emails, there's the lunch and learn non-public ones, the full lunch and learn playlist. You just scroll down, you'll find it.
Yes. Yes, she's great. So definitely check out the video. And then the next slide, this is the video, right? This is the time-lapse video of sped up very fast, showing one of our planting days. Oh, this is one of like there's like 7 different sites that we've been restoring at Lake Louisa. And we're going to have to stop talking about the different sites because pretty soon they're all going to be like grown together and we'll be, you know, just planting everywhere, which is, you know, wonderful. And I should talk about Teresa and how she like really came to love seed collection and growing plants. And Lake Louisa is really what inspired her to do that. So she met state park biologist Chris Matson, who many of you probably know is the grass guy because he's like, you know, ask him anything about grass ID and like he's the man. And so he oversees restoration work and prescribed fire at Lake Louisa State Park. And so they met at the park or at a rescue one day. I can't remember which came first. And they got to talking and she, you know, was telling him how depressing the rescue was and how she really was attracted to seeds. And so one day they met at Lake Louisa State Park and he gave her the royal tour, the royal behind the scenes tour of Lake Louisa and all the restoration work that he was involved with. And he showed her like the difference between here's a site that we've been restoring for 3 years and here's a site that was just burned and here's a site we're still working on that's down the road in another 3 years. And they started talking about the possibilities and how she might help. And so he's now got her collecting seeds from all kinds of native plants around Lake Louisa State Park, propagating them and using them to introduce new populations throughout the park. So one of Chris and Teresa's visions is to have Asclepius just blanket the entire Lake Louisa State Park, which is a bold and wonderful vision. And they're both very excited about it. And there's also some rare plant populations at Lake Louisa. Banyan Grandiflora is one of those. You saw the picture earlier, and she's been collecting and propagating that also. So are we looking at the nursery now at Lake Louisa? So, okay, so we're looking at the shade house at Lake Louisa, and Lake Louisa has been so awesome. This shade house is pretty old, and they had some tables in there that were literally falling apart. I think we killed the last of them because these pots of sand are so heavy. So we, you know, asked them if it would be possible for them to build us some new tables, and they did, and they're wonderful. And I think they have plans to build 1 or 2 more. But so here's a photo. You see a lot of lavender flags in this photo, and those are all rare plants that will be number tagged when they go out into the park to establish new populations of rare species. So Polyglotonia probably takes up the most of that table there that you're seeing with all the lavender flags. And then in the next slide is just a picture of the pots are empty because she just sowed an entire table full of plants, and that could be anything from Perinechia to Asclepius tuberosa. It could be just about anything there. And then the next slide is just a picture of one of the restoration areas at Lake Louisa State Park. It's been a huge success. All the rare plants that we've rescued, including critically endangered Warea and plexifolia, are doing really well. It is, you know, it's heartbreaking to lose your sandhill sites, but then this helps, you know, when you see the fruits of your labor and you see the difference that you're making on the ground, it does your heart good. It helps heal a lot of the pain and depression that comes along with rescuing. And then the next slide is a picture of Teresa planting cuttings of Polygonella myriophylla at Green Isle Gardens Nursery. And this is a plant that it propagates best from cuttings. It's one of our rare ground cover plants. It's endemic to Central Florida. It occurs mostly in scrub habitats. And these plants were rescued from that site in Orlando that I told you about back in 2014. And we've been propagating from the plants ever since. And the next picture is a picture of that introduced population that was rescued from that Orlando scrub site and introduced at Bill Frederick Park. So it's doing very well. And I'm so sorry that Teresa couldn't be here, and I hope I've done this a little bit of justice. And so now I'll turn it over to Patricia Burgos.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Yes, Patricia Burgos. I am a biologist, environmental planner. I'm currently working as a planner, but prior to this, I was a land manager for some of the sites, the recipient sites that Native Plant Society volunteers dedicated. When you acquire a site from an agency's perspective and look at it, we all wish to get sites that are at the prime. However, you end up getting ruderal sites, pasture, overgrown tree plantations. It's just, I've even inherited and gotten landfills, mini landfills. It's just a range. And so to see, just to echo what we've heard from Laura, from Juliet, to see a site that's in prime condition, and then to see a site that you're managing as a ruderal site, not in prime condition, it does break your heart because you know how much time and effort it will take, but it is worth it. What I did was I put together my little PowerPoint slides. And the first thing I came up with, the land manager's thought process. As the land manager, you, like I said, inherit if you take a job or you're part of the acquisition process, and you're always looking to find large properties, more than just 1 acre, or if it's 1 acre next to state lands, you want a contiguous. These small satellite parcels, very difficult to manage. So if you're ready, your board has given you permission, you have some money for the property, you want to identify a donor site. And that's where FMPS has been very key. They've been the door that has opened to these donor sites for a land manager to receive those rescued plants, seed. And I can't tell you, I mean, we've never really calculated the cost, the value of these donor plants individually. But if you think about a nursery going, you could spend anywhere from $3, $6, $7, depending on the difficulty in propagating that imperiled species. And you add 100, 500 plants you're trying to rescue, that's a lot of money. And so to find a donor site, as Juliet said, near your recipient or the host site is incredible. So once we get that identification of the donor site, we're developing that partnership with FMPS, a local state agency. We certainly not only, as Juliet said, permission from the owner, but we also as an agency have to get permission from our board to be able to spend the time, the effort to receive these plants and take care of them. After all that work, that the society has done, after all that work, the volunteers, we want to give them the best opportunity to survive once they come to our site. So we have to, of course, prepare our site. As I mentioned, not all sites are pretty. Some sites you have to take up to a year to prepare. And what do I mean by that? Well, you do have to think about, can I maintain this site? Can I put prescribed fire on this site to maintain these plants that are of great quality from a wonderful intact sandhill? Will we be able to continue the natural cycle, the natural processes? If that site that we are using as a recipient site has invasive species, well, it's going to take a while. What kind of invasive species? For example, if we have Kogan grass, very thick, very difficult. If we have air potato, if we have Bahia grass, if we have Pangola, Bermuda grass, it does take time and effort and can cost a bit, but ultimately our goal, our direction from our board was, with the land management plans that have been approved, to restore these sites. And this is what it's going to take. So let's say we end up, and sometimes in coordination with Juliet and FMPS, is timing. Staff will go, or if staff has been pulled elsewhere, timing that when we are able to receive either plants that have been at Green Isles hardening up, or on the same day that we can bring some of the plants that we have taken from a donor site onto the recipient site. I've taken large tubs and really just grab even the soil around the plant, actually enhances the soil of the recipient site. And sometimes you're grabbing seed, not only for the plant that you're trying to save, but from the surrounding plants too. So I've taken large tubs and just brought over as much as possible, gone over to our recipient site, dug a hole that's equally as big, and just slid it on in there. It takes a lot of muscle, but it's worked for us. And I did that with some lupin. I know we've talked about that, and done it on the same day, taken it out of the donor site, drove over to the recipient site, put it in, watered it for not only that day, but actually coming after, and I'll talk a little bit about the maintenance aspect. And they did well. So timing is everything. And like I said, that effort. Now, for our properties, well, the properties I used to manage, plant material and seed. So a combination, whatever was available. The establishment period, well, depending on when you start, it may be 2 weeks, it may be up to a month. You enter this knowing that work is going to have to be the rescuing, that is work. The establishment period, that is work. Maintenance, that is work. But ultimately, what is the goal? Well, restoring all these public lands. If you don't mind advancing the slide, Valerie.
I got you.
Okay, great. All right, so these are some of the things that I mentioned a little bit, the timing and opportunity. And as with all land managers, you have to keep up with the rainy season, the drought. I was lucky, I was working in a water management agency, like a mini St. Johns River Water Management District. I had the water resource manager, and they were constantly talking about rainfall totals. So I could tell, keeping up with the weather, so that potentially what would be the best of all worlds? Well, rescuing right before a rainfall for several days. So nothing can replace rain. Tap water, well water, if that's all you have, wonderful. but rain is just the best. The composition, mineral, it's just incredible how much better it is. The invasive plant coverage, I will tell you, has discouraged me on some areas, but you have to think 2 or 3 years out. With the rescuing, if I start now, in 2 years, I can potentially receive plants. Maybe not now, but in 2 years out, I can do it. Prescribed fire, pre-rescue and post-rescue. So in preparation for the property, we want to make sure we introduce fire, get it on the schedule. And then, of course, once the plants have established, then going ahead and introducing that fire again. Fall, winter, spring, summer. It's brutal in the summer. But if Juliet is saying, listen, this is when we're rescuing, you're there, summertime. Of course, you like to do it in the winter, a little less watering, a little better for the plants so they don't go into shock. But you have to be opportunistic. Commitment to water and maintenance, yes. Prior, and Laura mentioned it, as they rescue the plants, they water the pots. That's great. Keeps the soil ready. So if I can put it into the ground that day, or part of the hardening process, because as you're doing it, those plants that are waiting to be transported, they need to stay moist in the shade. So they're not going immediately into shock. Staff versus volunteers. Great to have staff. Wonderful to have volunteers to not only rescue, but then go ahead and come over to the property. We always need volunteers. And although it can be a little discouraging on these the donor sites, when you go to the recipient site, you're like, you can see the progress. You can see what it can become. So then it's a great feeling once again. Grants, showing the progress. We'll talk a little bit about that. I have an example of one property that we did. And then the grants. If you can get grants, which I did, to try from Florida Wildflower Foundation, of course, all that FMPS has done for us that is money, money in the bank. Volunteers, expertise that we've been able to get. Okay, the next slide. This is the pasture that I inherited, 9 acres. You do see that poor lone goldenrod in there all by itself. Bahia, Bermuda, Pangola. This is unique because this acreage on the Flat Island Preserve, south of Leesburg, little north of Pear Park. This 9-acre pasture is surrounded by this hammock. So it's almost isolated. So it didn't have any real amount of natives on the property. There were no heavily infested beyond this field. So nothing that would come in from the side as you were working on this field. This is 2006. This was kind of the baseline property, monoculture, and it's how we're going to do it. Not a lot of money. 9 acres to restore the whole thing is incredibly expensive. So we did a little at a time. It's like snaking through the property, going back and forth, half an acre, whatever we were able to do. Next slide. So, of course, we prepped the property, a lot of herbicide, and then burn. You see this 2007, beginning the wildflower meadow, we relied on seed. And of course, depending on what you ordered, we have standing cypress, we have the gaillardia, a little bit of brown-eyed Susans, black-eyed Susans there. But then you can see behind it. And I have to add what we did back in 2004, prior to, if you can see the tops poking out, we planted longleaf pine. Of course, back in 2004, because there was a drought 2003, 2002. No one was planting on public lands. When we got the hurricanes, 3 hurricanes, and we were coming out of the drought, a lot of land managers ended up planting longleaf pine. Would I do that now? No. FNA, Nature Conservancy, all recommend working on the ground cover first and then planting longleaf pine. But this one, we did it the opposite. So you can see the longleaf pine struggling through the Bahia Pangola in the background. Next slide. Okay, so as part of the seed, 2010, we had to be careful. We didn't rely as much. We didn't have as much success with seed. And we ended up getting a little bit of a monoculture. So we decided more live plant material. So we would buy from nurseries, Nancy Bissett's nursery, Mark's nursery. Want to make sure we had a diversity of species, not one dominating the landscape. So we have here some liatris that's just ready to bloom, love grasses, which easily reseed, very hardy. So one technique that land managers have done to shade out competing grasses is to put heavy love grasses on a section on a property. So this way it gives the opportunity to kill out the grass you don't want, and then you can easily remove love grasses to put in the stuff you do want. So it's kind of a placeholder. Okay, next slide. 2013, we're increasing our diversity. Rescues, seed, but more so live plants coming in between the rescues and going out. We have lopsided Indian grass, liatris, boldwina, and in this we would put Banania, Luton's Polyglot, what we could get, Banania. We had open areas. You can see the sandy areas. You can see less and less of the invasive grass. And again, all through this is maintenance. It's not a one and done thing. So now we're increasing our diversity. Next slide. You can see going back to doing it in sections, biting off small portions. On the left-hand side, you can see our diverse plantings, but you can see some of the grass actually on the left too. I mean, we had to go back and kind of reapply herbicides very directly with wands. You can apply herbicides, and we cut 2-liter bottles that created a hood, and we would put it specifically on the grass we wanted to treat so there wouldn't be drift. You have to be careful of that drift, the herbicide drift. So on the right, you can see, we haven't gotten to that section yet. The longleaf pine are doing very well. We just have to, it takes a little time, but the effort. So this is a nice photograph of kind of that border. Okay, was it well worth it? Yeah, I think so. We increased our diversity, honeybees, pollinators, wasps, butterflies, liatris, Florida paintbrush. We had farewell. And then, of course, the gopher tortoises that we had there, but it was hidden. I mean, it was a monoculture. We still have Bahia grass, which they love. They love the Bahia grass, but now they were open. They can sun themselves. They can use the apron for their nests. Now they can move around freely, find each other. So it was worth it, and it continues. I left the agency in 2019, but we pretty much finished up the 9 acres. So from 2006 to 2019, 13 years of commitment it took. But that is one of our objectives of land management, sticking with it, making sure to roll with the punches, what you've been given, and also to accept new techniques, expertise as things change. You go with it and try it out. So it was a great experience. I always enjoyed going back there. So it went from that Bahia Pangola pasture when I heard nothing, no crickets, no bees, no nothing, to standing in the middle of the field, having all this activity around me. So it was wonderful.
Agreed. Thank you, Pat.
Sure.
So nice to have a land manager's perspective here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Juliet threw in a couple slides here about our other restoration partners. Juliet?
Oh, sure. I can just mention that if I can find the slides. Okay, there they are. Yeah, I just threw in some slides of from some of our other partner sites. Oakland Nature Preserve is located just south of Lake Apopka. And this has been a recipient site for many, many years for local rescues. And they have an active prescribed fire program. And if you have not been to Oakland Nature Preserve, I encourage you to go. It's gone from a pine plantation way back in the day to a restored preserve. And it's just wonderful to see. And then there's another slide taken at Lake Louisa State Park. And so we've talked a lot about Lake Louisa State Park, and there's a picture there on the right of Wariam plexifolia, one of those successful rescues. And this is an annual species. So Laura mentioned earlier, we just collect seeds from annuals. Well, in this case, with a critically endangered plant, we had only weeks to go on this one site, and we said, let's rescue everything we can. We'd never done it before. It was about to flower. So they hardened off in the greenhouse. They got a little wilty at first, but they hardened off. They were fine. We introduced them. They flowered, produced a lot of seeds. And so every year since, they have, they come back every year from all that the seeds that they produce. So that's been a huge success. And then we have a picture of, this is one of the very first plantings we did at St. John's River Water Management District, Little Italy. And this has been a huge success. You won't even recognize it now. And every year we just do some more. We just keep going and going. And their efforts there to restore Little Italy are just fantastic. There was a lot of Bahia grass at this site, but it was a good recipient site because there were also a lot of native plants still there. So they're slowly but surely getting rid of the Bahia and planting wiregrass, that firm foundation, and then they'll come in and plant longleaf pine and then more diverse ground cover. And so we're really grateful that we can help get that diversity out there for them. And then finally, there's a photo of a before and after of one of the restoration sites at Bill Frederick Park. One of the first sites that we restored is near the Carter Center at Bill Frederick Park, and it was a disc golf hole. So that's why you see just this bare open white sand, because all the foot traffic in there just kept all the plants from coming up. And so you see on the right, it's fully restored, a diversity of species that we rescued from that Orlando site. And the gopher tortoises have moved in. We notice this every time we do restoration work, is that the gopher tortoises are like, yay, food and habitat, and they move right in. So that's another really good thing to see. Turn back to you, Val.
Okay, so I just Mac she's not going to make it back. So I have just some photos from her and some nice words that I'm going to pull up. It's going to take me.
So I mentioned Green Isles earlier, and in Teresa's presentation and in mine, they've just been a fabulous partner. They've provided nursery space, to harden off plants. They send people out to help on the rescue sites. They send equipment, ATVs, and provided us with pots if we ran out. They've just been fantastic to work with. And so we're just really, really grateful, plus all the seeds. So we give them seeds to propagate. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership and experience.
Yeah. So, obviously they're out in a place with not very good cell reception. So she apologizes profusely, but she says, being a nursery partner is truly a labor of love. That takes an entire community. We have the easy part, to house, foster, and care for plants until their receiving site are selected and are ready. It is a tremendous honor to provide this partnering service, and in doing so, hold hope for the survival and thriving of these imperiled specimens. So these are the kind of amazing people that you'll get to work with. There's some more of the photos. There's some more of the plants in Green Isle showing that, the flags make it to Green Isle, and then the rare and endangered plants then, go on to be flagged and marked in their recipient sites. So I'm sorry I haven't been able to check the chat based on how I did this. So if everybody is ready, we can go to Q&A. I'll switch the view to gallery view. Do we still have, hey Pat, hey Laura.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys. And I'm pulling up the chat right now. Okay. Oh, wow. Look at all this. Woo. The Environmental Conservancy of Northport, who I think is one of my friends, asks, might there be an upcoming presentation available explaining technique /how /when to collect seeds, parentheses, how to recognize when the seeds are ready, and or how to care for them upon harvesting, etc.
I'd love to take that. We have gotten so many questions like this and more about how we do it and how can we, teach other people. And it's getting pretty obvious that we need to have like an entire course. And people are just requesting more classes. So I think what we're going to have to do is and we've talked about this for years actually, is developing coursework. And turning it into like a certification program so that, we could verify that people have gone through the course, like master naturalist type thing, gone through the course, passed the course, and then receive a certification. California Native Plant Society does something similar. So I think there's a huge desire for this out there. And so so this is our year of strategic planning. We're setting goals for next year and the following years. So I think that's going to rise to the top. And it was identified by our board also as a huge priority. So.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not a huge organization, right? We have only 3 full-time staff members, but I think we have the capacity to run something like that in the near future. And
well, we're going to add capacity. Yeah, we have to add capacity. More staff.
Yes.
Get more done.
More done. Diane asks, where is she located? That was pretty early on in the presentation, so there's a lot of she's here. So I'm in Kissimmee. Juliet is in Polk County, so Kissimmee, Osceola County, Central Florida. Juliet is in Central Florida, Polk County, Dundee. Laura is in Central Florida, on the Ridge, Lake County. And then Pat, you are Central Florida, Lake County as well. And Mac is Central Florida. Is that still Orange County where Green Isle is at? Or are they in Lake County? They're in Lake County. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're all Central Florida. And Teresa is Central Florida, Polk County. Mm-hmm. The question that we all knew was coming. Is there a sign-up sheet to learn and to rescue?
Yeah, so again, we're going to have classes. Yeah.
So if you're in Central Florida, you can email me, and if your schedule allows, we can incorporate you on some rescues in the future. But, we don't have this big, we can't deploy like hundreds of people for rescuing at this moment. But yes, if you're interested, you can email me, and especially if you're in Central Florida. Suzanne Kennedy chimes in, definitely no more than 10% of seeds from wild plants. Yes, this is a CPC guideline, so please, rescuing versus seed collection from, an existing site, they're very different things. So keep that in mind of why are you collecting the seeds? And if you want that population to persist, you have to leave seeds. Suzanne also asks, she says, nice seed trays. I think she's talking about when Teresa was showing the photo of the seed trays in Green Isle. She says, indigenous soil in those seed trays and pots, correct?
Yes.
She says, fun time-lapse video, bend from the knees, lol, or not. I am working on that, Suzanne. I'm doing a lot of squats and mobility. But you're right, there's not a lot of knee bending. on my part. There's, you got to work on some things. Everybody has things to work on. Okay. Wendell Cropper asks, how long does the population monitoring go on at the rescue sites?
Well, hopefully forever and ever. So, I mean, there are populations of rare plants that have been monitored for decades. So the longer you have data, the more you learn from it, especially in an era like this of climate change. So monitoring will become even more important than it has been in the past. And there are lots of reasons to monitor, to document land management strategies. That's another hugely important reason to monitor. And so you want to know how the populations are doing. How are they responding to your land management? How are they responding to climate change, et cetera? We also do habitat studies. So that also tells you the preferred habitat of the rare species that you're monitoring. So that's another consideration when you're doing restoration work is, gee, how do I help to create or put these plants in a place where they will be most happy on the landscape?
Right. I mean, we are in this for the long haul. I mean, we have these restoration sites. We know where they all are, and we have been going back to them, and that's, you know, our long-term mission. And before, I just wanted to say, because I know the numbers are dropping off, you know, if you're interested in rescuing or you see a population you think of plants that needs to be rescued, I hope the impression you got is this is hard. It's hard. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people to talk to. You have to be good with people. You have to be good with plants, but it's not impossible. So if you're going to do this, keep in mind you have to be as dedicated as we are, and you have to have a good team around you, and that, you know, you should talk to us so that you do it right, because we can help. And don't just go
We're
in the
happy
dark.
to help. Yeah.
Yes, we're happy to help.
We're
Just
happy to help.
don't go in the dark of night digging up plants. That is not what you are
Please don't.
getting from this presentation. That's what you leave from this presentation from. I'm going to be very angry at you. Thank you. Eric Rupert asks, do we ever try and request developers leave a portion of their site as natural?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, we request it all the time, right?
Yeah. Can I add to that? As a planner, I look at site development plans, industrial, commercial. And so in our codes, and this is, I work for Sumter County, in the code, it prescribes a certain buffer. It prescribes a certain open space. And what we try to do is get to the developer first and say a few things. One, we are very flexible, that if you have native vegetation established, oak trees that are, 4 or 5 feet tall, a nice hedge, nice shrubs, you don't have to wipe that out. We'll give you credit for that. So you're not clear cutting everything to start all over again. Another thing is looking at their species list to make sure they're not including a category 1 invasive in their landscape. A lot of landscape architects are savvy to that, but not all. And so you have to review the list. So you can encourage, but you have to be able to be flexible, because safety trumps native plants. And so you have to work with the developer, but if he has to have utilities, he has to have ingress and egress, then unfortunately you can't always save everything.
You know, and in a lot of these, right, so Sumter County and other counties, you know, development regulations are county by county. But, you know, if we don't have strong regulations from the state level about, you know, requiring buffers, a lot of the counties will do like the bare minimum. So you can't necessarily expect that this is, you know, on your county level, you're getting these protections. And we do always ask, but, you know, it's carrot and stick, right? If there's no stick, they don't have to do it. It's sort of hard to say. You can request it, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it. Jan Allen, who I just saw at the Pinellas Aleworks event, was great. Hi, Jan. Says, how often is post-restoration monitoring done? What measures of success are used?
So the rare plants we usually monitor once a year. And depending on the site, we'll do like a huge documentation of every species that we see. So that's usually done after the initial years of introductions. So we want to know what species are persisting, what species are falling out of the mix, and try to answer the why. And there are some common, for example, fairly common sandhill species like silver croton that for some reason they survive rescue, they survive hardening off, they'll survive for a few months in the field and then they die off before they can reproduce. So the unfortunate consequence is that we are losing species diversity because of plants like that. And we're still trying to answer those questions. So the point of, so that basically monitoring goes on for as long as it's needed in terms of like the big picture to see, you know, what species are persisting, how they're doing, what's falling out. Once you get, we were doing that at St. John's for a few years. After a while, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, everything's doing really good. So we don't need to do this anymore. So now we need to focus just on the rare species. So we moved into that direction this year, and we're just focusing on the rares, on demographic monitoring there. So it depends on the site and, you know, the situation.
I mean, from what I can tell from how we plan things, you know, we go out when things that we care about are blooming or have other sort of identification characteristics. So, I mean, at least once a year, usually more often for most of our sites. And yes, hybridization. So Ruth would like to know, please say more about hybridization. Can you generalize what plants do that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get specific on that. So I'll give you a concrete example. On the rescue sites that we're working on now, we have Lupinus cumulicola, which is endemic to the Lake Wales Ridge. It's a blue-flowered lupin that has like a rounded shape, right? Not to be confused with Lupinus diffusus. Diffusus meaning it's, you know, diffuse. It's more flat against the ground. It doesn't have that upright rounded shape. So we have three major recipient sites, the Little Italy site at St. John's River Water Management District, Oakland Nature Preserve, and Lake Louisa State Park. Of those sites, the Water Management District has Lupinus diffusus. So we do not want to take Lupinus cumulicola to Little Italy. But on the Lake Louisa State Park and Oakland Nature Preserve, they have Lupinus cumulicola. So absolutely, we're going to take Lupinus cumulicola to those sites. So that's a good example there. And hybridization, wow, there's a lot of native plant studies has, especially Roger Hammer, he's done some great articles over the years about the problems of hybridization. So we have a lot of endemic species in Florida that are just endemic to specific regions of the state. That's how speciation occurred, because of a number of reasons. The way the landscape is in Florida, when you have the uplands and the wetlands, and it kind of breaks up the continuity on a large landscape scale. So you have speciation. So on the west coast of Florida, we have one kind of helianthus. On the east coast of Florida, we have another. And one of the problems in the nursery trade or the sharing trade is that those two species have been mixed across the state and are hybridizing. So that endangers our original endemic populations if those species are planted nearby an existing rare population. So you really need to be careful. Lantana is another great example. Read Roger Hammer's article, The Lantana Mess. It's just, I mean, it just hits the nail on the head. And you can read our policy in service of our mission, the CPR policy. And there's a lot of detail in there. If you read the full document, there's some examples in there of hybridization problems in the state of Florida. So that's a good reference document.
Yes, Jan points out that this is an excellent argument for doing floristic inventories of the source and target sites. Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's all the questions in the chat. Laura, do you have anything you'd like to elaborate on?
Well, one thing that I didn't mention that I would like to is that we actually can save trees. when I was talking about size and so forth, we can get seedlings with longleaf pine, turkey oak, and saw palmettos. There are a lot of different larger plants. We see them on site where they're big and beautiful, 5, 10, 20 feet tall. But then we'll find the little ones. And the interesting thing is the little guys, when you dig them up when they're this big or even this big, their roots are still, you know, pretty darn good size. But if you're committed to it, you can do it. And they get transplanted and they survive and thrive. So so it's not just wildflowers, you know, the little dainty guys. We can get trees. So it's hardcore work. So yeah.
Another great argument for why you should know the site that you're bringing it to and the capabilities of your nursery. Can your nursery handle 1-gallon pots? Are you working with a place that can't handle large pots? Can they handle the seed tubes? What's the watering situation like? Is your recipient site, do you need trees? Do you not need trees? This is not go dig some plants, put them in somebody's backyard, and you will figure it out later. No, this is something that, you know, you could do, but, you know, you need help. You need people like Laura and Juliet and Pat and Mac.
And Teresa.
And Teresa.
Yes.
Very important. Pat, do you have any final words?
No, great opportunity, very short, to share this type of information. Don't want to scare anyone. We definitely need many hands make easy work, and the enthusiasm. What you're doing is at the front lines rescuing the plants. But if that physical aspect is at this time not comfortable for you, FMPS needs support. Working with your local governments, working with those planning departments to make them realize the importance of, through site plan development, reducing the invasives, increasing the natives. We can do it now. The nurseries, the native nurseries, are able to handle 100, 500 natives. Maybe not 15 years ago. So an army is needed at the front lines, behind the scenes, county commissioners, just like Valerie was saying, interacting with your local legislators is a wonderful way to promote natives. Thanks.
Yes, land protection. You know, if you want to prevent plant rescues from intact habitat, we have to have functioning Florida Forever programs. We have to have the support of local governments, and we need people to advocate for these places that we don't want to get destroyed and have to use a bunch of time and effort to move these plants. So we don't have a lot of intact habitat left. We have a lot of land that's protected that needs restoration, and we have a lot of places that are intact that are slated for development that we can't do anything about right now. So we got a long road, and I hope you guys will join us on it. I hope everyone has enjoyed the Lunch and Learn, and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.